So today's video is not going to contain major spoilers about the Tournament of Power, however it will contain light spoilers up to Dragon Ball Super episode 118, and I wanted to give you guys a courtesy spoiler alert before you watch this video. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I've said my piece, let's get started. So let's discuss the androids today, guys, and how the androids' redemption story throughout the Dragon Ball series actually compares to a lot of the other characters that we've had in the Dragon Ball franchise. And what I mean by redemption stories is that Dragon Ball has had a long history of so many villains that have actually converted into good guys, have converted to people who are now allies of the main characters in the series. And I feel like the androids are very underrated when it comes to this, when we look at how evil their future counterpart is, and when we also look at how delinquent they were when they were first initially introduced into the series. So let's go through history, talk about a lot of redemption stories, and classify the androids into this category. So when we go to the very beginning of Dragon Ball, guys, I mean the absolute beginning, there are two groups of people that obviously and immediately became redemption stories. And I think the first one we need to really talk about here is Yamcha. So when Yamcha was introduced into the series, he was a desert bandit that was obviously trying to steal from Goku, Bulma, and the crew. And if you combine this with Oolong, who was obviously terrorizing that village and, you know, obviously was a very scary character with all of his shape-shifting, you have two gag-like characters today in Dragon Ball that were initially villains. And I feel like from the very beginning, Toriyama was playing with this whole villain to hero, you know, storyline in Dragon Ball. And obviously Dragon Ball is based on Journey to the West, but it was interesting to see Toriyama taking that gag element of humor and converting these characters so early on. And even when we go on to the Pilaf gang in Dragon Ball Super today, although GT kind of has a different, I guess you could say, depiction of the Pilaf gang, where they're not as acquainted with the main characters the way they are in Dragon Ball Super, we can definitely, you know, obviously say from Battle of Gods and Resurrection of F and moving on forward even into the future Trunks arc that the Pilaf gang are definitely now allies to, you know, Goku and all of his friends. So this is a guy that was trying to kill Goku and all of his friends. This is a guy that was always trying to steal with them. This is a guy that, you know, obviously helped, you know, release King Piccolo from the rice cooker. And now these guys are gag humor characters that are actually around to help Goku and his friends. And we could also, you know, attain this when they were trying to help Bulma with the time machine throughout the future Trunks arc. So definitely the Pilaf gang, Oolong, and Yamcha from early Dragon Ball have had their redemption stories. And then when we get into the more serious characters like Tien, I think he's a much more interesting case than all of these characters, because Tien's realization of becoming a good character wasn't as, I guess you could say, coincidental or forced as the other characters. It was all 100% internal, and in Chaozu's case, I mean, Chaozu's just kind of like this kid-like character who follows Tien and does whatever he does. But when we look at Tien's story specifically, what makes him interesting is the fact that after fighting against Master Roshi and Goku in the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, Tien kind of realizes the ways of the Crane School, and later on when we get to the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai and he fights against Mercenary Tao, he kind of looks at himself and says, listen, I've changed my ways, I'm gonna defeat him, and established himself as his own man. And I feel like that was one of the deepest episodes in Dragon Ball, because here Mercenary Tao is using weapons, trying to break the rules to kill Tien, and Tien breaks him down, defeats him, and shows that he can be strong without having to follow the teachings of the Crane School. And I felt that that was some of the deepest stuff throughout the 23rd tournament. And although it wasn't a major part of the storyline, it was very interesting. And obviously the biggest part of Dragon Ball, guys, would definitely have to be King Piccolo and Piccolo Jr. I mean, let's look at a character that, you know, was created to kill Goku, was to carry out the ways of his father, was defeated by Goku, was obviously building a very strong bond with Gohan, and then sacrifices his life to save Goku's son. And when we actually look at the Saiyan Saga, guys, one thing that I felt was really interesting about the Saiyan Saga that I don't see a lot of people talking about is the fact that a lot of those Saiyan Saga characters are characters that were all initially villains at one point of the series, but all fought alongside to try and save the Earth. When you look at Tien, when you look at Yamcha, when you look at Chaozu, even to I guess you could say an individualistic point of view, Yajirobe wasn't the friendliest guy when he initially met Goku. And all of these guys gave their lives or fought to save the Earth. And Krillin was really the only guy that was kind of always a good guy, especially looking at what Piccolo's done. And, you know, obviously that takes us into going into Dragon Ball Z and Vegeta. And, you know, obviously Vegeta and Piccolo are probably the two biggest stories in Dragon Ball Z. But Vegeta's redemption story is really interesting to me because, you know, this is a guy who was kind of forced into being a good guy because he needed to align with Krillin and Gohan, you know, throughout the adventures of Planet Namek. And then I feel like Vegeta had like a limbo point from after the Frieza arc to like the Android arc, where he's not really like a good guy, he's kind of just doing his own thing, but he's definitely not a villain. And then by the time he redeemed himself on the Buu Saga, Vegeta was definitely a good guy. And even if you want to go to Majin Buu, at least the Fat Buu, he was more so of a naughty kid, so I don't really want to conclude him too much into the story, but he does kind of exist within the constraints of this. And if I were to mention GT really briefly, the only real redemption story I think we could really talk about with GT would have to be Nova Shenron. But I feel like that was more so of Nova's choice. He just naturally had a different personality. So he was an evil Shadow Dragon. He just was a little bit different and had an honor code compared to a lot of the Shadow Dragons. So, with all of these redemption stories being said, and with me talking about all of these characters and analyzing how they compare, where do the androids stack up in all of this? Well, I think they're very underrated. And the reason why I say this is because when you look at the future timeline, yes, it is a future timeline. Yes, it is an alternate version of the androids. But it is the exact same characters as the ones in the present. And it gives you, I guess you could say, a what-if scenario of what if the androids lived in a world where they could essentially do whatever they want, and all of the events of the main timeline didn't conclude the way it did. Because who knows what the present androids would have done. Yes, they had a different personality, but there were so many natural changes to the storyline that maybe that actually led to them actually going off and doing their own thing, as opposed to what the original androids did. And I'm only saying that to say that we don't know the full outcome. And looking at even how the androids have concluded themselves throughout the Buu Saga, we see that filler scene where Android 17 was donating his energy towards the Spirit Bomb. Android 18 settled down with Krillin, actually had a baby with Krillin, when in fact in the future timeline, her and her brother killed Krillin. And even going back to, you know, the earlier parts of the Android Saga, I mean, these are guys that, you know, were giving the Z-Fighters a hard time, even though the Z-Fighters kind of put themselves onto the androids. 18 broke Vegeta's arm and was literally torturing him in front of all of his friends by just breaking his other arm and just humiliating him in front of all of the other characters. And the way that 17 just easily came in and just wrecked everybody. These are characters that were definitely not good guys, and to see them in the Tournament of Power, you know, fighting alongside good, 17 protecting, you know, a wildlife reserve, very similar to how Android 16 obviously had a very animalistic connection, was obviously a very interesting thing to see. And especially when you look at Android 18, who's had way more development than Android 17 throughout the series, it is interesting to look at her and 17 and say that although they have changed their ways, they were always delinquent characters. And it shows you that even though they were cyborgs that obviously had an impact from Dr. Gero to do all of the evil things that they did in the future, or to at least be rebellious in the main timeline, their will was strong enough to change to the point where they would be fighting alongside good. Because remember, guys, they still chose to marry Krillin. They still chose to settle down and have a family. They still chose to settle down and protect the wildlife reserve. Everything the androids did was all by choice. And because of the fact that the androids changed so much in the present timeline by choice, even if the future timeline is completely different, makes me redeem their characters significantly more than what I would have earlier in the Dragon Ball series. And to see them fighting alongside Goku Goku, a character who they were essentially being programmed or at least instructed to kill, and is now fighting alongside with him to protect the Earth, is definitely a very interesting story throughout the Dragon Ball series. So guys, that's been my video for today. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and let me know where you stack up the android's redemption story compared to all of the other Dragon Ball characters that I've mentioned today. So please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe, and remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.